We're going to get straight into Joseph's talk because it might run long and cut into Q&As. So go ahead and start the video.
Hey everyone, welcome to 360 iDev. Really glad that you were able to attend my presentation today. I believe this is my 5th year attending 360 iDev, first year speaking, so extremely excited about that. I hope you are too. My presentation today will be views in iOS, the old world and the new. And I think there's always been a little bit of discrepancy between developers, a holy war you might say, between developers that do things programmatically and developers that do things only in storyboards. I know I myself ran into this holy war a few times, so I want to dive deep into that and then take a look at a newer way, like a Swift way to do this, and maybe end this holy war. So going into it, just a little bit about myself. My name's Joseph Injik. I'm a developer at Capital One. And prior to that, I worked at the Washington Post and at BMW. Graduated from the University of Cincinnati down in southern Ohio. Now, my story kind of starts off with BMW, actually. So I learned to do iOS using tutorials, which is like always through storyboards or some type of interface builder. Coming to BMW, we do everything programmatically. And they had some reasons for that. It helped remove clutter and improve navigation. We had less merge conflicts. We had more control. We had better reusability. Going into that, if you ever open up a large storyboard file with multiple scenes, it can kind of be tough to get around. And usually they're not as organized as this one above me. Typically they can be all over the place, especially on older projects that really didn't have some of the new kind of features that current Xcode does. So it can be very cumbersome to move around in that project. But then you also have the issue where multiple developers start touching the same file because they need to touch maybe a different scene in that file, but they're touching the same storyboard file in general. And that ends up leading to merge conflicts. Merge conflicts with storyboards aren't easy to resolve. They end up being like on a generated XML that Xcode gives you, so it's really hard to read and understand, and I only know a few people that can actually read through it. I'm not one of those people. We get more reusability when we do things programmatically. We can separate things out. We can easily copy and paste over code or constraints, whatever we may need. Now, storyboards have gotten better with that over the course of time, but they're still not fully there and easily, copy and paste it as text is or our code. And we get a lot more control when we do things programmatically. We can write our constraints, whether it be in the visual formatting language or VFL for short, or using layout anchors, which we'll talk about a little bit further in this presentation. We can also activate and deactivate constraints on the fly, whether that's to work with our business logic to change the view for whatever we need it to change for, or whether it be for an animation where we can deactivate one and activate another and then have that thing animate across the screen. So one example I have here, 2 buttons, or not 2 buttons, but 2 views. One's a button, one's a label. And we can go ahead and set them in this visual formatting layout. And looking closer at that string and what it's trying to do, we can see that this is a horizontal constraint. Now, had that been a V, then we would have a vertical constraint there, obviously. Now, if you didn't put any letter there before that colon, then it would just default to a horizontal constraint. Looking further into it, we have these pipes that are here. And you have one on both sides of the string, and that defines our superview. So in this case, I'm defining actually the white space here, but the superview can really just be any parent view that you're attaching your view to. Going further into this, we have these dashes and a few numbers. So what do they mean? So just one dash defines a standard spacing, typically 8 points. When I define a number in there, that's non-standard spacing. You can see those shown here both in the green and in the red, where the standard spacing is at the red bar and the green is the non-standard. Now you can notice that the skip button is actually touching the edges of those green bars, whereas the name label is not. And that's because you can see in this next slide that the skip button has 30 points width that's defined inside of it, whereas the app name label has nothing defined for its width. So the app name label is using its intrinsic content size to grow as much as it possibly can. So if you probably set the background color to that name label, you will see it touch both of those bars. But typically, like I'm not doing that for this name label, so that's why it shows that there's more space than what we're actually defining. Going further into it, we can also add and define metrics. So in this case, I'm using a metrics key value pair dictionary, but this can be a globally defined dictionary or a like iOS specific, such as like safe area layout constraints or your margins. So you can set those metrics in there as well. You can pass that easily here in this layout constraint, and then you can see that we're defining now those key value pairs in the string itself, so that we can manipulate this and not have hard-coded padding, right? So if tomorrow our designer told us that we want to change our padding to 16 instead of 15, we can go switch that globally and it's used across all of our entire application. We can get very specific with how we want things to look with the visual formatting language. We can say, for example, in this one, where the icon has an equal width to the icon date, there's 20 points of padding between that and the icon label that has a constraint priority at 250 and a width of 120 points. And then going further, we can see that the padding next to that is going to have a constraint priority of 750 with 20 points of padding. And then after that, we're going to see that we have an icon date that's greater than or equal to 50 for its width, which again is going to affect our original icon in the beginning, right? Because that's equal to our date. Now, visual formatting language is one way. We also have NS layout constraints. You can just define just like this. And this has been a way that developers still use it, but I've rarely seen it nowadays. Typically, people will stick to visual formatting language or with anchor constraints. So iOS 9 changed a lot of things for us, and this was the time I started working with the Washington Post. iOS 9 brought anchor constraints, storyboard references, and stack views. And we look at anchor constraints. They're a lot easier to read than visual formatting language, and we're not going to have these strings that we might mess up on, where we have to like go and debug what constraint are we missing, or like are we missing a colon, or what it may be. So this makes it a lot easier, and Xcode is like could tell us there's an error before we compile, which is great. So here we have a center X anchor. So we're basically saying our new view is going to be centered horizontally on our super view, and we're activating that constraint. We can also do a width anchor that's equal to a constant, whether that constant's global or hard-coded, such as in this example. And then last but not least, we have this new anchor, and it's a height anchor, and we're just setting it equal to the other view's height anchor with a multiplier of 20, meaning that it's going to be 20 times larger than the other view. You can set the multiplier with fractions or whatever it may be. Sometimes I'll set a view to say this is a multiplier of 1/4, meaning that my view will always be a 1:4 ratio with whatever other view I'm setting it equal to. Now, never forget when you're doing things programmatically to set translate auto resizing mask to constraints to false. It's something that I always typically forget and then wonder why my view is not being laid out correctly. Now, if you do end up getting a console error, which I'm sure most of us do, even though it might look good on our devices, we still want to dig into those to see what that is, because if maybe you can't break your UI, but sure enough, QA or a user out using the production app will definitely break it some way, somehow. So as the more you work with constraints, the easier it'll be to kind of debug this on your own. But for those of you that are new to iOS, try going to WTF Auto Layout. It's a great website where you can take your console output, toss it into their website, and you'll get some details on like what actually went wrong with my project, and kind of help you debug that. So like I said, we also had storyboard references that came out on iOS 9. Storyboard references allow us to directly link one storyboard file to this reference here. And the reference can be to any other storyboard scene. So rather than having 5-6 scenes in one storyboard, we can break it down where each storyboard file has only one scene. This way, if multiple developers want to go work on a storyboard file or on a different view, you can all do that and not conflict with each other on the same storyboard file. iOS 9 also brought us stack views. Stack views were an easy way that we can do just that. Like we can stack views vertically, we can stack views horizontally. So we can do stack views within stack views, such as this middle yellow container showing. We have vertical stack with all the orange or yellow containers, and then a red stack going horizontally within that orange parent view. Storyboards are great for seeing the layout for new developers when they come to a new application. They're great if you know where all the GUIs are. You can drag and drop stuff. Nibs are also a useful tool, less use in today's time, but they are typically more for, I believe, constant or static screen. So a great example for that is if you have a table view that doesn't have any data, you can use a nib that you just toss in there and say, there's no data for this table view. And we can actually use nibs to break down small elements of different views within our app. That's always a great example that I use it for, and you can also initialize it with something. So for example, if I was searching for cars on cars.com, if no cars load for whatever filter I'm using, then I can say, no data for, and then initialize maybe the type of cars that I was looking for. So no data for BMWs, or no BMWs in your area. Now, not this year, but last year we came out with a really cool new way of doing like laying out views, and that was with SwiftUI. Now, SwiftUI is a really awesome way because it's a declarative way of defining our view. So before we just talked about how we need to define every single element, every single constraint to make our views work, and sometimes it's not perfect, and it's really hard to do. And the best example I could say for this is it's the difference between imperative programming and declarative programming. Imperative is if I need to draw, for example, this icon. I'm not the greatest designer, I can't really draw, and it would be pretty tough for me to make this thing. I could probably make something that looks close to it, but it won't be perfect. Even if I had a step-by-step guide, I wouldn't make it this nice. But if I call someone like Bob Ross, I'm like, Bob Ross, I need you to draw me the SwiftUI icon. He could easily do that. And he knows exactly what I want, and that's kind of how SwiftUI works too. I can tell it what I like, and it does the work of putting it all together and laying it out for the most part, like what I want. So let's dive into Xcode and take a better, closer look at how SwiftUI does that. So we talked about how in storyboards that when we connect identifiers and we don't change that in code, we can get crashes, or when we're trying to link things up and copy and pasting, we can get crashes that way. When we update something in identifier, we don't update in code. So the great thing about SwiftUI is that a lot of the changes that we make here on the canvas itself, we actually update in our code as well. So I can actually go down here to this text and add a modifier, and a modifier could be something like color. In this case, it'd be under background. So I can say background, it's going to add a color blue. I can also go in here and add some padding around our around our text. And now you'll see that color is expanding a little bit larger. And what's interesting is that every modifier is basically a view. And you think that this is bad, it's like a recursive use of a view, but actually Apple handles this really well, and it's like they try and do it the most efficient way possible. So you can see actually if I add a modifier down below that, you'll see the difference there. So it's showing that padding happening, but the color itself isn't expanding the entire padding. So a lot of cool stuff there we can do with that, but just like what we talked about before with stack views, we still have stack views in storyboards. So we can create a VStack here, which is just a vertical stack, as you would have guessed, and we can add this text view to it, and we can add a few of them in here. So here we have 3, and we'll just Control I so that looks a little bit nicer. So now we have 3 stacks here, but I can go down here and add, let's say, a padding to my VStack, and you'll see that the VStack itself is getting padding. But is there a way that I can not rewrite this every single time? And yeah, the answer is yes. I could toss all of these into a group, and then the group itself could have that padding attached to it and in the background color. So that kind of does the same thing there. Helps clean it up, and we can position things differently. So this is if I was just looking for stacking things, right? We can also look at you can do horizontal stacks within this, or more vertical stacks, however you want to line it up. Organizing things in SwiftView, like I said, is declarative. So however you define it, you can continuously come over here and look at what modifiers you have available and add those in. Something like a blur, or not bold, but where's blur? Blur itself took, if I remember, with doing it normally, was pretty hard to do in UIKit. With SwiftUI, they make it really easy to do so. And let's say I want to go create, instead of doing all this, I want to use a list, for example. Lists are just as simple to put together, and like I said, iOS already knows, or Xcode already knows what you're trying to do with it, so I can take this really simple list that I have down here at the bottom already and just toss it in there. Let's clean this up a little bit. Control I is a really cool tip. Whenever things are out of place, Control I will help make sure everything's formatted correctly for you. So here I'm just passing this array of cars where we put it in a horizontal stack, and we just label the make and the model. So if I resume this canvas over here to the right, you'll see that it quickly does that. This takes a good deal of work to do in a either in a storyboard or in UIKit in general, whether it's programmatically or with a storyboard. And it also gives us this benefit when we create our model. We can add identifiable to it, which allows us to do a differentiable data source down the line. So if we want to quickly search for vehicles here, we could do so. But SwiftUI definitely seems to be the future for us, and is definitely the nice mix of a visual GUI where we can easily quickly go make changes. So people that might be a little bit more used to storyboards can go in here and easily select a text and add modifiers to it, or whatever view they want to add a modifier to. But for those people that also want to manipulate and do everything programmatically, they still can. But either way, whether you're doing it in this canvas itself or in the code, both of them update. So we no longer have the issue that we had with storyboards. This is a huge improvement, and definitely I think it's the way of the future. It's only available for iOS 13 and up right now, so it might take a year or two before these large companies start picking it up, but highly recommend coming in and playing with it when you get a chance. Thanks so much for attending this presentation. Shoot me any messages that you guys have. We'd love to hear them and see where you guys are with SwiftUI.
There we go. I love that talk. The thing I remember about 360 iDev is Nathan Ehrer gave a talk on UI views once, and it just sort of transformed everything for me. And so it always warms my heart, so to speak, to see people talk about views. So I was looking at the room. I didn't see much questions yet. I guess what's your favorite feature from the various types, from the nibs to the storyboards to SwiftUI? What's your favorite from each of the three?
Yeah, I think nibs have just been really useful for me when I need to create just a view to place in there really quick, and I can use multiple places throughout my app. Like I was using that example, like a table view where I stick it in anywhere, but also for very small views of my apps. If I need to just put a block somewhere or some type of specific view somewhere, that nib access is a nice container that I can just toss in wherever I need it to, and then just set constraints on that itself. but programmatically is kind of the way that I started off. I mean, I started off doing tutorials and doing things in storyboard, but you probably remember, I think the first time we met, I was with Ryan Polos, who's very big on programmatic and
exactly,
and working with him. So that's kind of what took me down that rabbit hole. But I think it was good just like learning how to do things programmatically, because it gives you kind of the understanding of what storyboard is actually doing when you're dragging over these different leading and trailing constraints. Excellent. But yeah, I definitely say overall, I do like having a mixture of it. So if you're going to use storyboards, they're great. They're great for new devs coming in and understanding the flow. Definitely break them up, and then like still try to set your colors and everything programmatically, because then you can do those global color sets. And I know that they've improved this over the course of the years. They have color assets and everything in the storyboards as well. But I still like having everything globally set somewhere, and then I can always just toss it in with the code itself.
Excellent. What was in experimenting with Swift UI, what was your biggest aha moment, you think?
I think just having the canvas up with the code itself, because I even kind of pushed my team a little bit more to do things a little bit more programmatically when we can. Like, let's use storyboards here and there, but I still push for the programmatic side when I can. But Swift UI has been nice, where all these like little gotchas you have in storyboards, whether it's forgetting to connect an IB outlet, or because like those are force unwrapped, or forgetting to like change your string for like a table view, right? Your identifier, like those don't update in your code. So if you're updating in one spot and not the other, you automatically have a crash. It's these little gotchas to get you in storyboard. So with Swift UI, it's nice with the fact that like as you're updating your code, it's updating live for you. So even like doing things programmatically, you don't always see visually what it's going to look like. Like you can imagine it, but it's hard to see it on screen. So having to wait for that compile time each time, especially for a large app, can be tedious. So having that direct update was awesome. And like not, or completely avoiding having these random gotcha crashes that storyboards might have, was definitely my aha moment.
So Franklin has a question. He says, what's your view on UI view representable?
On UI view representable, I haven't used them as much, to be honest. I definitely like them, but I think, I guess I don't have much of an opinion on them. I've haven't really used them much in my code base, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Excellent. So I think the biggest, hardest hitting question for everybody is, you're wearing the same shirt that you are in the video. So did you film that video this morning?
I can lie and say that I did, or I just have a bunch of these jerseys. I'm a big fan of the Croatian soccer team. They're from there myself.
Clearly.
We're number 2 in the world. Okay, France didn't count, but we're up there now. So I definitely represent wherever I go.
So now, Capital One in New York?
DC, just outside of it, Tysons, Virginia.
I was going to say, so were you guys remote before the pandemic?
We started remote work, I want to say late March. And yeah, right now I think we are up to next year. So I think they're going to reevaluate that, as the year gets closer. As of right now, we're still remote, and that's kind of our plan for what we have right now.
Okay. So Melissa wants to know, you seem to definitely prefer programmatic UI kit programming over the nibs and storyboards, but do you still prefer Swift UI over programmatic UI kit? What limitations or downsides do you think exist in Swift UI specifically?
Yeah, so I haven't got to dig into Swift UI as much as I would love to, because Swift UI is not as backwards compatible as I need it to be right now for work, just because we support more OSs than Swift UI allows us to. So yeah, it's been my personal work experience that I've had, like some side projects that I worked with and got to play with it. So I definitely prefer Swift UI. And then downsides to it, I'm trying to think. So I think, what was the issue? There was an issue with, I think, collections on there. So doing collection views, but also the Swift UI representable when you're trying to connect your Swift UI to a UI kit, it seems like a pretty gross process. I think one meme that I saw to it was like Homer Simpson's back skin tied tight so that you look really nice up front, but in the back of them, it's all like these weird connections. So that's kind of the one downside of like bringing in SwiftUI is you have these like weird representable classes that you're using to link to your UI kit. I mean, if you're in a pure SwiftUI project, then you can avoid that. But I don't think SwiftUI handles everything. And I want to say one of those things they don't handle are collection views, which you would still be doing the UI kit. That would be the one limitation I could see there. So you're stuck using these weird connections. But I mean, SwiftUI is growing. We're only second year into it, and I feel like there's going to be so much coming out. I mean, we have so much come out for it this year as well. Just like small, like it's been improving overall. Like I think the first year, I couldn't even understand the errors that it was giving me. And then after they made their update, there it is. Someone Franklin just put it in the.
Good job.
That's UI kit representable is something.
Great. I think that's about it. So we'll go ahead. Well, thanks again for coming and presenting. And I'm sure people will continue to throw some questions for you out in your Slack.
Sure, I'll keep an eye on the Slack channel.